Good afternoon and welcome to Temple Beth El's Lunch and Learn. This is our final in our series with Rabbi Jack Romberg, Doorway to Heroism in the Holocaust, One Man, Two Countries, and Three Heroic Actions. Remind you, this is the last in this series. Next week, we'll go to Israel with Professor Paul Lips, who will be looking at the Jewish community and its ability to strike and revolt and reflect on politics in a very powerful way. Rabbi Jack Romberg's great uncle, a German Jew, was a decorated German soldier in World War I, part of the resistance in Cologne at the start of Hitler's reign of terror, and a Silver Star decorated U.S. Army soldier. And this month, Rabbi Romberg has taken us on a journey from 1812 through the Holocaust through the lens of his uncle's actions. And this is the final in that series. So Rabbi Romberg, will hand things over to you. We want to thank Jake, our awesome producer, as well, for all his great work with us. Thank you. You'll need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. I didn't know I was muted. Okay. In any case, good to see everybody and to be in the last session of the class. And of course, going back to 2 weeks ago, went into the beginning of the problems that were caused by the Nazis against the Jewish people in Germany. Of course, the big thing was the boycott of Jewish businesses on April 1st, and I went into some of the details of that. And of course, after that was just constant more things done against the Jewish people. And what I'm showing right now is, well, and of course it went completely up through the 30s. It just got worse and worse and worse in each year of the 30s. And the one thing for my family that actually went well, and that's what picture I'm showing right now, and that is, this is my dad at 13 years old in 1936. And this picture was taken just before his bar mitzvah. And what I had, heard from Dad and, read on things that he had put together and that Uncle Richard had actually put together was that this was the only good thing that happened in those last number of years that they were in Germany, is that they were actually able to have dads. They were actually able to have dad's, bar mitzvah and to, celebrate it with him. But in 1937, Jews who had served in World War I as in the German army were veterans. They were actually taken away from the German army. They were, and I have the actual document given to Richard Stern, to Uncle Richard, that showed that he was no longer considered to be a German veteran. And that was done to all kinds of Jews. And so even though he and 30% of the Jews that served in the German army in World War I had gotten some kind of medal, and Uncle Richard got the Iron Cross, they were not considered to be veterans anymore. So heading into 1938, the deepening of Aronization of Jewish businesses got bigger and bigger, and actually, at the beginning of 1938, they started to push Jews more and more and more to get rid of their properties. And in fact, by the beginning of November of 1938, 25% of all Jewish property had already been taken over by Nazis. And that's before we even got to Kristallnacht. So another major thing that happened earlier in 1938 is on March the 12th. And I wonder how many of you know the term the Anschluss. Okay, the Anschluss was the takeover of Austria by, of course, Nazi Germany. And there were 192,000 Austrian Jews. And the rise of attacks against them once the Nazi Party took over Austria jumped up huge. And in fact, a bunch of the Jews, especially from Vienna were fleeing and going into northern part of Germany because they were trying to get into Belgium. And actually, Uncle Richard was having a bunch of them stay in his home, and he would take care of them as they were leaving. And Uncle Richard actually had already, in the summer of 1938, had applied for a visa to the United States. He knew that he had to get himself and his nephew, that is my dad, that he was the legal guardian of, and his sister, my dad's mother. He had to get them all out of Germany. So he started to work on that in the middle of 1938. Okay, in June of 1938, there were 1,500 Jews put into concentration camps. And that scared Uncle Richard a lot. He was worried about being arrested and put into a concentration camp because, as I had told you, what happened to him on April 1st of 1933 when he was protesting is he was arrested then, but he had a friend who was a policeman who got him out. So we could see just in how my family looked at this, how awful things were getting 37 to 38. And so now I'm going to go into Kristallnacht and go into how that happened. Well, the first thing everybody should know is that way back in early in the 20th century, especially in the decade in which World War I happened, there was a pile of Polish Jews who fled to live in Germany. And of course, back then, as I had said back then, Germans, what was going on in Germany was much more appropriate for Jewish people. But interestingly, and there were about 50,000 Polish Jews that lived between either Germany or Austria, okay, back by the 20s. So what, is interesting though, is that a lot of the German Jews did not look good. They did not look at Polish Jews as being good people. They felt that there was a number of German Jews that were very ultra conservative in terms of who should be living in Germany. And especially in the 30s, there was a chunk, about 15% of the Jewish people in Germany had the opinion that if they were going to not get oppressed by the Nazis, they also had to be against the German Jews. And so about 15% of them actually came out against the Polish Jews in the early 1930s as the Nazi Party got more powerful. I learned this actually from a historian who gave me things to read in New York. So it was very, very fascinating to learn this. And I did not know about German Jews being against Polish Jews, because actually my dad, who had been a member of Hashomer Hatzair, which was a teenage thing to be part of in Germany, and of course a bunch of places, to learn how to live in a kibbutz in Palestine, what became Israel, of course. Dad, his best friend that he made in Hashomer Hatzair happened to be a Polish Jew. And I'll tell this story very quickly. When I was with Dad in Israel in 1973, we were visiting another friend of his that he knew from Hashomer Hatzair, who actually ran a lot of the programs in Hashomer Hatzair. And they were looking at pictures from back at that time. And he saw a picture of his very good friend, Harry Walker. And he said, gosh, I don't know what happened to him, because I walked with him to the train with his family on October 29th of 38. And I never saw him again. No, but I went with him because the Germans were kicking out the Polish Jews at the end of October of 1938. So the other friend that we were visiting in Israel, he said, "Oh, Harry lives right here in Tel Aviv." And Dad said, wow, it's 35 years since I've seen him. And he actually went to see him. I went to see another friend of mine that I had met in Israel a couple of years earlier. But Dad went to see his friend that he hadn't seen in 35 years. So that's a key thing to know, is that the Polish Jews were kicked out of Germany at the end of October of 39. Well, Herschel Greenspan, whose family lived in Hanover, Germany, he got a letter from his sister on November 3rd of 1938 about how German police forced them to leave. His family, and by the way, this is a group of Polish Jews that have been forced to get trains to get out of Germany. Okay, so on the night of 10/28, they actually were even part. His family were part of 484 arrested Polish Jews in Hanover to be forced to be deported, and Herschel had been living in Paris since 1935. When he got this news on November the 3rd, he decided to take vengeance on the Germans for the persecution of his family. And he bought a gun, and in Paris on November 7th, he went to the German embassy and he asked to see a key official. He was brought to the third secretary, Ernst von Roth, and he shot him 5 times. Despite being badly wounded, von Roth got the strength to go to the door and call for help. And he was sent to Alma Clinic and was able to say to the first secretary that the visitor had fired on him and said he was avenging the Polish Jews. When Hitler heard of the shooting, he promoted von Roth to the rank of embassy counselor. And of course, von Roth died on November 9th. He died at 4:30 p.m. Okay, so the news of von Roth's assassination made German Jews aware of the pogrom that was about to happen. And in fact, just before he actually died, my dad was in a Hebrew class, as a teenager, learning more Hebrew, and the rabbi who was teaching his group of teenagers happened to be Dr. Kober. He actually knew that with von Roth dying, there was going to be an awful pogrom against the Jewish people. And he actually said to the class, from what Dad said, he said to them that night, he goes, "We have to pray that von Roth lives, otherwise we're all going to suffer." So a German newspaper in Berlin called the assassination of von Roth the Jewish attempt, and said that there would be the most serious repercussion against the Jews. Goebbels' paper said, "We will no longer tolerate the hundreds of thousands of Jews in our territory who control entire streets of shops, who avail themselves of public entertainment." The government then forbade the publication of Jewish newspapers in Germany starting on November the 9th. They made it that Jewish newspapers couldn't be published at all. Nazi officials went to numerous cities to urge party leaders to organize action against the Jews. Some Nazis said that Greenspan was a hired assassinator. In other words, they put out that he was hired by the Jews in Germany to do the assassination. They didn't say a word about that it was his, action because of what was going on to his family. The Nazi leaders did not want to appear as, they didn't want to appear like they were officially authorizing this pogrom. It is not determined if Goebbels decided to organize it himself or if Hitler did the ordering of the pogrom. We're not sure exactly who in the end organized it to the very, very end, but both of course were totally in favor of the pogrom. So secret instructions sent to all of the police headquarters. These are secret instructions sent to all the police quarters. I'm reading these notes now. Number one, action will be taken against the Jews, particularly against their synagogues throughout Germany at the earliest possible moment. The police should cooperate with other forces of order to guard against the possibility of pillaging or other excesses. Number two, an important archives housed in important archives housed in synagogues, they should be removed to safety immediately. Okay, but of course that was not taken. Preparation should be made to arrest between 20,000 and 30,000 Jews throughout the Reich, preference being given to the wealthier Jews. In other words, that's who they wanted to arrest for sure, was any Jews with any influence should be arrested. And there, you'll be hearing the story of another family member, not from the Stern family, but the Romberg end of the family. In carrying out, number four, in carrying out these instructions, any Jews found in possession of arms will be dealt with extremely severely. The regular and reserve troops of the SS may be called upon at any time during the assignment, but overall direction of the operation shall be the responsibility of the police. Number five, in terms of the instructions to the police headquarters. There were key differences that the SA chiefs sent to their sections. First, they said to burn the synagogues, not to keep them safe. Second, they ordered the destruction of shops. Third, any Jews found carrying arms should be killed. Fourth, the Fuhrer does not wish the police to intervene. In other words, any action going on against the Jewish people, and there were policemen who normally were not that against the Jewish people, but they were being prevented from doing anything for the Jewish people. Because as I said 2 weeks ago, there was actually a policeman who had already become a member of the Nazi Party, but who was friends with Uncle Richard, and he got him out of the police headquarters when he was arrested. So Kristallnacht began on the night of November 9th. SA and SS soldiers actually dressed up in civilian clothing and went into action by 1 a.m. on November the 10th. Okay, so some examples of what happened. In Berlin, specially trained squads isolated Jewish buildings, cut the telephone lines, and set 7 large synagogues on fire. In Leipzig, shattering of shop windows, stores, and dwellings looted. 3 synagogues hit actually by bombs in Leipzig. In Nuremberg, 9 murders, 10 suicides. 5 of the suicides were women, 5 were men. In Frankfurt, young Jews were forced to cut up and burn Torahs. So they actually forced some Jews to destroy Torahs in Frankfurt. Almost every synagogue was destroyed, and even in small towns, because in the small town that Uncle Richard's great-grandpa, Seligman Stern, where he found and he built a synagogue in the small town of Freisheim back in the 1840s, that synagogue was destroyed, along with almost every other synagogue throughout Germany was destroyed. And many Jewish homes, well, here we go. Okay, this is of course what happened to the synagogues. And this is typically of what happened to Jewish stores and Jewish homes. And many Jewish homes were invaded as well. So 7,500 Jewish shops were actually damaged. Basically all that had not been Aryanized before the pogrom. Any that had not been taken over by Germans were pretty much destroyed or put in such a bad situation that the Jews were then going to be forced to just hand them over to Nazi owners. Okay, many Jews were actually taken to concentration camps. 10,911 to Dachau, 9,845 to Buchenwald, 9,000 to Sachsenhausen. 6 days after their internment, these were permitted to leave. Men over 60 were permitted to leave, those seriously ill, and those who could certify that they could immigrate. In other words, those that could certify that they could get out of Germany, and those who agreed to sell their businesses for amazingly almost no sum, for the lowest sum ever. Those were allowed to go out of the concentration camps and either get out of Germany or to turn over their businesses, that they agreed to do that. Jewish male teens were forced to do a lot of cleaning up of destroyed things in synagogues. And that happened all over Germany, where Jewish boy teens were forced to do work. And in fact, my dad was one of the ones who was forced to do the same thing. And that was, I think, okay, that was in Runstrasse Synagogue in Cologne, which had gotten a lot of damage, but the Torahs had not been destroyed. So he and the fellow teenagers that were working with one of their teachers on getting things put together and taken out. What they did is they took out the Torahs, they took out the things that the Jewish community might still be needing, and they found some spots that were not destroyed that they could set up services and set up still teaching engagements, teaching classes for Jewish kids, because all of that was completely destroyed in Dad's community in Cologne during Kristallnacht. And German document in January of 1939 claimed that 1938 enabled the right path to solve the problem of Jewish influence and its corruption. It says, actually, this document says specifically, it solves the problem of, quote, Jewish influence, its corruption of our political, economic, and cultural life. So despite that the Jews had nothing to do with having the Polish man Herschel Greenspan kill the secretary at the place in the as a secretary of the ambassadors in France, even though he was killed and everything, it had nothing to do with the rest of the Jews in Germany. They blamed it on the Jewish community in Germany. So what I'd like to do now is actually give a few stories of family people who lived through Kristallnacht, okay? And by the way, the first one I'll talk about is Uncle Richard. This is actually the entrance to the concentration camp of Dachau, okay? And Uncle Richard, at the very, very beginning of Kristallnacht, he was trying to make the door of his store be so strongly locked that nobody could break in. But he saw a friend of his who was had a business across the street got arrested, and he knew that the likelihood is that he was being taken to Dachau, because most of the people who were arrested in Cologne, the Jews arrested in Cologne, were usually being taken over to Dachau, and that was the first of the concentration camps put together back in 1933. So when he saw that, and all of a sudden the SA soldiers who were attacking in that area started to attack on his door, he fled out, and he actually went to their next door neighbor's place, which was connected to their house and their store, because that was owned by his brother-in-law, who happened to be Catholic. So since his brother-in-law was Catholic, his sister, who of course was Jewish, they actually were able to stay safe in their house. And my dad and his mom hid in their house, and dad actually listened to all of the stuff going on in their house, because there actually was a way that he could hear through the wall into what was going on in their living space above the store that they had at the bottom. Okay, so Uncle Richard came and he said to them, listen, I've got to get out of here. What he did is he had a friend outside of Cologne who was able to hide him for a few days. And so he went and he hid him for a few days. Dad heard all of the destruction of the windows in their home, in the store, in the floors of their home that they lived in, as well as in the store. He heard the stuff that was done and things being said about taking things, and it turned out that they stole their food, stole a lot of their clothing, and so forth. And what happened when he heard that they had left, what Dad did is he actually, went on his hands and knees. He went around the corner of the home that he was hiding in, into the back of the home that he lived in, and he saw that there was nobody there. He looked up, he saw that all the windows were destroyed. He went into their home, went upstairs into their home, and found everything that was, how much had been stolen and how much had been destroyed. And in fact, since it was in November, one of the things stolen was their things that they had to wear, when in the colder weather, the clothing and coats and so forth. And so Dad had no coat to wear to keep himself warm. Okay, so that's basically my dad's story, and of course Uncle Richard. But Uncle Richard did make it back to them a few days later, and he was able, within the next few weeks, well, first of all, he had to give up the store to the Nazis, and the second thing is within the next few weeks, he actually got a family person in New York City to put up the money necessary for them to immigrate from Germany to New York. And they set up that they could leave Germany in May of 1939. And Uncle Richard was able to leave then, but Dad and his mom couldn't leave then because there was a problem with his mom's visa. And so I won't go into the detail of where they left just yet. If I have time later, I'll say that. Okay, another story, the story of somebody who found me in 2011. In 2011, a person by the name of Bert Romberg. Bert Romberg would have been my dad's first cousin, but Dad never knew that he existed because Dad was not allowed to get in touch with the Romberg family. He was only connected to the Stern family, and of course the Katz family, which a Stern person was married into and was also their cousins. But he knew nothing other than he had met his father one time only to get his signature on his, on the document that he needed to show the German government to allow him to go out to leave the country. And he met his father one time in 39, but he knew nothing about the rest of the Romberg family, almost nothing about the rest of the Romberg family. But in 2011, Bert Romberg found me and my mom and my brothers, and he invited all of us to come to a gathering of the Romberg family that was survived in 2012 in Dallas, where he lived. And what I learned is that Walter Romberg, who was Dad's biological father, was one of 13 siblings in that Romberg family, and that a chunk of those siblings were destroyed, killed during the Holocaust, but there were some who, especially their wives and their children, actually survived. So Bert Romberg and his sister Maggie Romberg, who now is still alive, and she's Maggie first, their father, Alfred Romberg, he had also won an Iron Cross. And he was a rare Jewish officer in the German army. That was even something above what Uncle Richard did, that he was a Jewish officer. He had married Sita Rothschild and took over a good business in Astheim, a small, very small town. Alfred, however, died in 1934, and Bert was 4 and Maggie was 6 when their dad died. In 36, Sita decided to move to Eschwege, a town that was a smaller town, but her older sister lived there, and there was a larger Jewish community there. And so in 36, when things were happening against the Jews, she kind of thought that they would be safer in a community with larger number of Jews, because there were only 2 Jewish families in the town that they had lived in, and she was forced to sell the business for very, very little money. Okay, so at the time when Kristallnacht happened, which is when they had moved to Eschwege, Bert was 8 and Maggie was 10. They lived in a large apartment house where there were several Jewish families living there. And Bert learned the next morning that a number of the men had been arrested and sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. Okay. A friend of Sita had a Christian maid who had heard that Jews were going to actually be arrested. This is just before Kristallnacht. And that family that had her, had this Christian maid, was able to flee to Antwerp, Belgium, just a few hours before Kristallnacht began. And so that family got away into Belgium. The synagogue in that town got ransacked, things stole out of it, and then burned down. The school for the Jewish kids was suspended, so Bert and Maggie, they could not return to it. Life got so much worse that Sita, she made the decision to get her children to the United Kingdom, to get them over to London, or over to England, at least in some way. And they actually made it there in May of 1939 through the Kindertransport, the transportation of German Jewish children that was set up. And that actually, that was actually run, the one that they went on, that was actually run by Quakers in England. Sita had made it there as well, but separately from her children. And she did not live with her children through the entire war, and through entire of World War II. Because of how her children got over there, they ended up being foster children in separate families in England. And she had to become a maid for a family in England. And they finally were able to get together in the beginning of 1945. And that's when they decided, because they were, the mom had gotten in touch with some family that had made it to America, they decided not to settle in England, but to actually come to America. Okay, another story, and this is about another sibling of Walter Romberg, who would, my dad's biological father. And his name was Karl Romberg. And he actually also served in the German army in World War I, but he wasn't an officer and he didn't win any kind of medal. But he had the most successful business of all of the Romberg siblings, because he was an agent selling wool to stores all over Germany. And what he did is he was the agent running an organization for suppliers throughout England. Okay. And those suppliers in England, even when things got bad for Jews and there was boycotts of Jewish businesses and so forth, actually this group of Englishmen running their their supply, their wool supplies, in England, they did not want to have anything bad to happen to Karl. They really liked the way he did business in Germany for them and sold so much for them over there that they kept it going. And so his business was incredibly successful. And and the Nazis hated the fact that his business could keep going and that it was still successful. So even, Karl was able to go to London to meet with his suppliers a number of times, still through the 1930s, through 34, 35, 36, 37. And what he did is he set up a bank account in the London branch of Chase Manhattan. Okay. And he set up a bank account so that his money that he put away, that he could get his family out of Germany. He was planning to get that done. Of course, he didn't know when he would get them out, but he knew he had to get them out. And so he was putting money away so that when they left Germany, they could actually live a decent life. Okay. Well, he was also, since he was a veteran from World War I, there was a fellow veteran from World War I who felt that he was friends with him. And this veteran from World War I warned Karl about 2 weeks before Kristallnacht happened. He warned Karl that there was going to be something bad against the Jewish people in about 2 weeks. And the interesting thing, and this proves that the Nazi party had been planning something even before the killing, of von Roth, because this fella was not only a veteran from World War I, but he was an officer in the SS. And yet, because he served in the war with Karl Romberg, he looked at Karl Romberg as his friend. And one of the things he did for him is he gave him a space in his own garage, in his garage, so that Karl could hide his car. And then he told him to go away for about 2 weeks. And he had to do it alone, and he had to leave his wife and his 2 sons. And the one that I interviewed and got all of this information from is Ralph Romberg, who died about 4 years ago. His brother Manny Romberg died before I met any of the living Rombergs back in 2012. So Ralph was telling me this, that they, the bottom of the building, the bottom of the building, and they lived in Essen, Germany, okay? And of course, the bottom of the place that they lived was the office for the very, very successful business that their father had, the business agency. And they had a governess, a woman who actually would teach the boys a lot of things in their home, so they didn't have to, go out to a school that didn't work or whatever. And she actually was Catholic and actually had been raised. She had been raised in a nun's space because her parents had died, and so she hid in the upstairs with the 2 boys and their mom when Karl had to go away and hide, and they were upstairs. And when Kristallnacht happened, they heard the business get completely destroyed. They heard what was going on downstairs. Well, all of a sudden, the SA and SS soldiers, they came upstairs and they thought that they would destroy the apartment and do things against the kids up there. Well, the governess was able to talk to them and say to them that she was Catholic, not Jewish, and that the family was actually leaving Germany, which was true. They were starting to set up things to leave Germany, that they were leaving Germany, and they were giving her the apartment with all of the furniture. So she said, could you please not destroy this because it's really going to be mine? And so the SA and SS soldiers left. And what Manny and Ralph did is they actually, right after Kristallnacht, they were able to be sent to an aunt of theirs in Sweden for several months. And that's where they lived while their dad and mom actually arranged for getting the visas finalized and setting up a ship flight, trip. And where they ended up going was to Cuba. And they lived in Cuba for a few years until America entered the war. And then they made it into the United States. So those are already three different stories of three different groups of people in my family. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, stop before we continue to see, is there anything, I'll go into this in a little bit. Is there any questions from anybody about Kristallnacht or anything that I've said so far? And if you have, then ask. And then after we're done with that, I'm going to go through the end things of the PowerPoint. Any questions? No? Okay. All right. Then this is, of course, a passport. This is the passport that Jews had to have, to get out of Germany. And you can see up here the J, to show that they were Jewish. And this is actually the passport of my dad's mom, Frau Walter Romberg, and her full name here, Martha Sarah Geb Stern. Okay, in other words, born as Stern. So Martha Sarah. Sarah was not actually her middle name. Sarah was the middle name that Germans forced all German Jewish women to have. They all had to have that name. So in any case, that is, is the first page of the passport. And there you can see Dad's mom, Martha Romberg. That's also from the passport. All right. Now, I told you that Richard Stern had gotten his family able to get out of Germany. And in fact, on May 14th of 1939, his very, very best friend and his family actually put together a party to celebrate that Uncle Richard was leaving Germany and was going to be part of things. And here he is. You can see him right here. You can see him there. And his best friend is sitting next to him there. And his best friend wrote a beautiful poem about him, which I got translated. I actually have the poem and wrote it about him, and his poem talks about how he was a hero in World War I and how he was a protester against the Nazis in 1933. And it goes into all of these wonderful things. Well, his best friend was captured in around 1940 by the Nazis, and he was killed in one of the concentration camps. So Uncle Rich never got to see his friend again. And his brother-in-law, who is Catholic, is right here, and that is Heinz. Okay, Heinz Flugerhofer. He ran the printing place right next to Uncle Richard's store, and he is the one who printed the pamphlet that Uncle Richard wrote that was handed out, to Germans during the protesting in 1933. Okay, so this was the gathering of Uncle Richard, to celebrate. Now, okay, Dad and his mom, they could not leave Germany until they got they got booked on a boat from the United States, but in Hamburg, Germany, for August 27th of 39. And in July of 39, Martha got her visa straightened out, and Dad actually had turned to 16 years old. And in the very early part of August of 39, Dad realized that he followed a lot of the news, and he saw that the Nazis in Germany had made a treaty with the Russian government, and he was worried that there was going to be the start of a war very, very soon, and that they were going to attack Poland. Okay. And he said to his mom, "We got to get out of here, and we got to catch the boat." He knew that it stopped in France before it would, go to Hamburg. And so she said, no, we'll just go to Hamburg. And Dad said, "Mom, I'm 16 years old. I have my own passport. If you're not going with me, I'm going by myself." And he convinced her to go, and they made it to Paris, where they could check into the boat. And the person who was a clerk there actually did speak German. And he asked my dad, "Gee, why are you here instead of in Hamburg?" And Dad said, "Because I think it was better to get the boat off of France than in Hamburg. And there's a war about to start." And this clerk said to Dad, "You're a bright young man, because we just canceled the stop in Hamburg. Our boat is not stopping in Hamburg." If Dad and his mom would have stayed in Hamburg, I wouldn't be on this Zoom to even talk to all of you. I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be here. So anyway, okay. Now, as Rabbi Jessica told you, Uncle Richard was a hero in the American Army in World War II. He volunteered for the American Army at 43 years old, and he won a Silver Star in January of 1944. And as America and the Allies started winning the war more and more at the end of 44 and into 45, there were things that Uncle Richard started to do. Well, this actually is a picture of what his division found at Dachau, because his division liberated Dachau at the end of April of 1945. And this was a pile of people, of Jews, that had been killed in Dachau in the weeks before it was liberated. And what Uncle Richard did was he sent this picture along with a bunch of other pictures, and I have all the pictures that he got, that were taken by a photographer that worked with the division that he was in the American Army. And one of the things that he sent was this to his family in New York, as well as he sent it to my dad, who was working in the Army. And what he was telling my dad and telling his family is, you can see why we had to fight against the Nazis and why we had to stand up against them, because look at what they did to our people. And if we don't stand up for the right things, there's always going to be problems. And what he tried to do was to get his family to not do arguing with each other, but only to understand why it was so important for them to fight against the Nazis and to stand up for what was right. This actually then was the celebration of the liberation of Dachau. And it happens that the rabbi who led this actually had been the original rabbi of Temple Israel in Tallahassee, where I worked for so long. He was the original rabbi in 38, 39. And actually, when the war began, he volunteered to be a chaplain in the war, and he ended up being the one who did the liberation celebration for the Jewish people in Dachau. Okay, and that's it. So I'm going to close this. Okay, and by the way, if you want to, if you want to get the book, you can go on my website. But also, I have blogs that I've written about a lot of the family that's not in the book, that's on the Romberg family. And if you're interested in those kinds of, blogs, then you can go on the website and read those stories as well. So what I want to do is open up for any other questions. Yes. Questions? Any comments, questions, whatever? Anything to discuss?
Hi.
Yeah.
Rabbi, do you see anything that we see in current events today in Ukraine that has any relation to similarities between what happened in Germany and the Jews?
Well, not just in Ukraine, but I see some things. I've seen some things over the last number of years that are a little scary. Yes, so let's start with Ukraine. First of all, of course, the Russians are lying about that there's Nazis in Ukraine. No, I mean, that the president of Ukraine is Jewish. Okay, and what they're doing is they are attacking civilians and destroying places that have nothing to do with military. And in Poland and countries like Poland, and of course when the Nazi party when the Nazi army went into Russia, they did the same kind of destroying, by the way. And one of the things I studied when I was in college, it was a thesis that I did because the one of the professors who taught me was the professor of German history. And I did a thesis on how Germans treated different countries. So for example, they treated those in Netherlands much better and much different than they treated those in Poland or Hungary or so forth, or Russia. So yes, there they did destroy. But there are other problems that my mom and my dad always had started to feel. I'll give you an example. Back in I think it was 92 or 93. Do you remember the fellow, the African American? His last name is King, and he was beaten up by the policeman in Los Angeles. Well, Dad called me when he saw that, and he said to me, "Jack, I feel like I'm back in Germany right now, if this is going to happen." When Dad heard me as a little boy at 6 years old, when we lived in West Virginia, and a kid that I was in first grade with was teaching me an anti-Black song using the wrong word, the N word, that is the terrible word. And I was singing that song at home one day, and Dad pulled me aside and he said, "You cannot do this." And that's the first time he ever told me of what he went through in Germany and how the names, what he was called in Germany. And I will say that last year on January 6th, I was actually working on my contract with the publisher that had offered me the contract to do the book on January 6th, when, the riot happened in DC. My mom was still alive then. My mom died this past November, but my mom was still alive. And she also, of course, from Germany. And she called me and she goes, "Jack, are you seeing what happened? What's going on in DC?" And I said, "No, what's going on?" And she's told me, and she said, "You know what? If your dad was still alive, and I miss him so much, but if your dad was still alive, he would feel like I do, that all of a sudden we're back in Germany." So these are the things that happen that disturb those that have been there. So that would be my answers.
Thank you.
Other question?
I read a letter to the editor recently, and it said that after the war, when Russia invaded the concentration camps, was able to liberate, that many Russians killed the concentration camp prisoners. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Well, actually, one of, I did not hear that they, well, from my family, I did not hear that. Let's say this. One of the people that I interviewed in Germany back in 2013, whose father had survived being in Germany, again, one of my dad's, one of Walter Romberg's brothers, okay? His first marriage was with a Jewish woman, and she died while giving birth to a little boy, you know, to a baby boy. And then a few years later, around 33, he married a Catholic woman in Essen. And of course, the Nazis kept coming after him, apparently, but this Catholic woman worked for a priest, a Catholic priest, and this Catholic priest did all the beautiful things that he could. He constantly hid, this person, you know, this Romberg person. But one time the SS soldiers in early of 45 found him and sent him to Theresienstadt, okay? And he was about to be killed by the Nazis, but the Russian army actually liberated him. And he was able to then, they let him leave, okay? And he literally walked back to Essen, which was a long, long walk, but he walked back to Essen. And he had the woman, he found his wife, his Catholic wife, and he had the woman who is my cousin that I got to know in 1948. So she's 6 years older than me, And when I did the research in Germany, she always helped me, whether it was in 2013 or whether it was in 2019 when I was doing the work on Richard Stern. She was always helping me and so forth. And she told me a lot about what was happening with the family. And her older sister also told me what had happened with their dad.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions? Anything from anybody? Well, I have
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I thank all of you for for being on the class, and it was really so much fun to be with all of you, and happy to happy at some point. I would love to come down just to do one presentation of things in person. So if that's possible. It would be wonderful, and maybe next year at some point I would come down, and because I am actually in Hollywood right now, I've already spoken at the 3 other synagogues, and tomorrow night I'm actually speaking at Judea down in Miami. So
thank you, Rabbi.
Maybe God's will. Rabbi Romberg, thank you so much on behalf of the whole temple and everybody. This has just been so moving and really incredible information, beautifully presented. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, it was wonderful to meet you too. And I hope, like I said, that one day we can meet you in person, because you all are so great and nice and everything. And it would just be great to be together. Take care.